Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight we're talking about Alaska. And something is very, very wrong up there. 8 people took jobs in the wilderness. Normal people, good workers, they needed the money. But what they found in that frozen darkness, let me just say this. Some of them are dead, some wish they were, and some, well, they're still out there, but they're not human anymore. I've got documents here, police reports, emergency recordings, diary entries that were found next to empty sleeping bags. And the thing is, nobody can explain what happened. Not the FBI, not the state police, nobody. Because how do you explain footprints that face the wrong direction? How do you explain 12 people dying from laughter at the exact same second? How do you explain phone calls from a town that burned down in 1978? You can't. But it happened. And it's still happening. If you're new here, subscribe to Mr. Midnight right now because I'm bringing you the horror stories they don't want you to know about. Hit that bell before we go any further. Now, let's begin with story number 1. And I'm telling you, after you hear what happened to this woman on a simple evening walk, you'll never look at Alaska the same way again. My name is Jenny Martinez, and I've been working seasonal jobs for 3 years now to pay my way through college. I've cleaned hotel rooms in Vegas, served tables at a ski resort in Colorado, and worked retail during Christmas rush in Dallas. But nothing prepared me for what happened during my summer job at Kenai River Lodge in Alaska. I thought the hardest part would be being so far from home. I was wrong. The job seemed perfect when I found it online. Kenai River Lodge needed a summer waitress for their fishing season. They'd pay good money, provide room and board, and I'd be back in Texas before fall classes started. The lodge sits 40 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by bush plane or boat. Wealthy tourists fly in from all over to fish for salmon on the Kenai River. My job was simple: serve meals, clean the guest cabins, and help make sure everyone had a good time. The lodge itself was like something from a postcard. Log cabin construction with a main dining hall, kitchen, and 6 guest cabins scattered along the riverbank. Behind the lodge, a hiking trail followed the river for about 2 miles, a perfect loop that most guests used for evening walks after dinner. The trail was well marked and safe. I'd walked it dozens of times since arriving in June. I lived in a small room behind the kitchen with Sarah, the cook, and Mike, the maintenance guy. Sarah had been working summers at the lodge for 8 years. Mike was in his 3rd season. The lodge owner, Tom Hendricks, flew in every few days to check on things, but mostly he left us to run the place. We had a radio system to check in with him every evening at 10 o'clock sharp. Tuesday, July 15th, started like any normal day. Our last fishing party of the week had flown out that morning, leaving the lodge empty except for the 3 of us. New guests wouldn't arrive until Thursday. These quiet periods between groups were always nice. Time to deep clean the cabins, restock supplies, and relax a little. After cleaning the main dining hall following dinner, I decided to take my usual evening walk along the river trail. It was 8:30 p.m., still plenty of daylight during Alaska's long summer days. The trail was my favorite part of working at the lodge. Peaceful, beautiful, and a great way to clear my head after a busy day. Going for my walk, I called to Sarah as I headed out the back door. "Be back in 30 minutes. "Stay on the trail," she called back, like she always did. "See you for radio check at 10. I walked out the back door of the lodge, past the guest cabins, and onto the familiar trail that led into the woods along the river. The sound of rushing water was soothing, and the evening air felt cool against my skin. I'd made this walk so many times I could probably do it in the dark. But I never came back. Sarah noticed I was missing when 10 o'clock came around and I wasn't there for our nightly radio check with Tom. She called my name a few times, checked my room, even looked in the dining hall thinking maybe I'd fallen asleep cleaning up. When she couldn't find me, she got Mike, and they both went outside to look. "Jenny," Mike called, his voice echoing off the water. "Jenny, where are you?" They grabbed flashlights and headed for the river trail, following the same path I'd taken 2 hours earlier. The beam of Mike's flashlight picked up my footprints almost immediately. Sneaker treads in the soft dirt, size 7, definitely mine. The prints showed I'd been walking at a normal pace, heading away from the lodge toward the halfway point of the trail. Sarah kept calling my name while Mike tracked my footprints with his light. Everything looked normal until they reached the halfway point where the trail curves around a large boulder. That's where Mike stopped walking and just stared at the ground. "Sarah," he said quietly, "come look at this." The footprints changed. At that exact spot, my forward-facing footprints just stopped, and backward-facing footprints began. Same shoes, same size, same stride length, but now the toe prints pointed toward the lodge while the tracks continued away from it. Like I'd suddenly started walking backward but kept going in the same direction. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, kneeling down to examine the prints more closely. Did she turn around? But there was no evidence I'd turned around. No scuff marks, no shuffling, no overlapping prints. My forward tracks just became backward tracks, with no transition point. And the stride length was all wrong for someone walking backward carefully. These prints showed confident, normal walking, like I was walking backward as easily as most people walk forward. Mike and Sarah followed the backward tracks for over a mile, calling my name the whole time. The prints never changed back to forward-facing. They led deeper into the woods, away from the lodge, still showing the same confident stride. The trail ended at a cliff overlooking the river, about 60 feet above the water. And that's where the backward footprints ended, right at the cliff edge. They found my body at the bottom of the cliff, lying face up on the rocky shore. My arms were crossed over my chest like I was laid out in a coffin. My eyes were wide open, staring straight up at the sky. My mouth was frozen open in what looked like pure terror. Mike climbed down to check for signs of life, but it was obvious I was dead. What wasn't obvious was how I'd ended up that way. The cliff edge showed no signs of a fall or struggle. No scuff marks, no torn vegetation, nothing to indicate someone had gone over the edge there. When the state police arrived the next morning, things got even stranger. The medical examiner confirmed I'd died from the fall, but the impact pattern didn't make sense. Based on how my body was positioned and the injuries, it looked like I'd been dropped straight down from directly overhead, not fallen from the cliff edge. My watch had stopped at 7:47 p.m., but Sarah and Mike both remembered me leaving for my walk at 8:30 p.m. The watch showed a time from before I'd even left the lodge. Then there were my clothes. Everything was on backward, my t-shirt, my jeans, even my hiking boots, but they fit perfectly, like they'd been put on that way intentionally. There were no signs I'd been undressed and redressed. No signs of struggle or force. The autopsy found no drugs in my system, no head trauma before the fall, no evidence of coercion or violence. According to the medical examiner, I'd walked backward for over a mile, then somehow fallen upward from a cliff edge that showed no signs of disturbance. But the really impossible part came when Mike was giving his statement to the police. He swore he'd seen me walking toward the woods at 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes after I'd supposedly left. But according to the medical examiner, I'd already been dead for over an hour by that time. When the police checked the lodge's security camera at the front entrance, they found something that made no sense. The footage showed me leaving through the front door at 8:30 p.m., walking forward normally toward the woods, but it also showed me returning through the same door at 7:15 p.m., an hour and 15 minutes earlier, walking backward through the entrance. On that backward footage, I moved with the same confident stride as the footprints Mike and Sarah had followed. I was walking backward as naturally as if I'd been doing it my whole life. The phone records made everything worse. My cell phone had called my mom at 7:50 p.m. When the police contacted her, she confirmed the call happened and that I'd sounded normal. But she said I kept repeating something strange. "I have to go back, Mom. I have to go back." When she asked me what I meant, I said I couldn't explain it and hung up. That call happened while I was supposedly walking backward through the woods, already wearing my clothes backward, an hour before I even left the lodge. 3 days after they found my body, Sarah went into my room to pack up my belongings. That's when she found my diary on the nightstand. The last entries were dated 3 days in the future, July 18th, 19th, and 20th, all written in my handwriting. The July 18th entry described my own death in perfect detail. I walked backward tonight for over a mile. I couldn't stop myself. Something was pulling me backward through time, backward through space. I could see where I was going, but I couldn't turn around. My clothes turned backward, my watch ran backward. Even my thoughts started going backward. At the cliff, I fell upward into the sky and came down dead. But I'm still walking backward even now. I don't think it ever stops. The July 19th entry was just one line repeated over and over. Walking backward, walking backward, walking backward. The July 20th entry was blank except for a single sentence. She's still out there, walking backward through time. The police officially closed the case as an accidental death. They couldn't explain the backward walking, the impossible timeline, or the future diary entries. The lodge owner shut down operations for the rest of the season. Sarah and Mike both quit and moved to different states. Neither of them could stand the thought of being around the Kenai River anymore. I never finished college. My parents used the money I'd earned that summer to pay for my funeral instead of my tuition. But here's the thing that keeps my family awake at night. Every year, on July 15th, the anniversary of my death, someone spots a young woman walking backward along the Kenai River Trail. Same height, same build, same clothes I was wearing that night. The footprints are always there the next morning, backward tracks leading from the lodge to the cliff and back again. The locals call her the backwards walker. They say she's still trying to figure out how to turn around, how to walk forward through time instead of backward. They say she'll keep walking backward through that night forever, trapped in a loop that runs in reverse. The lodge reopened 2 years later with new staff. They tell guests the river trail is closed after dark for safety reasons. They don't mention that the real reason is the backward footprints that appear every night along the trail, or the fact that sometimes people see a young woman in reversed clothes walking confidently backward through the woods, heading toward a cliff where she'll fall upward into the sky. If you ever find yourself near the Kenai River Lodge and you see footprints facing the wrong direction on the trail, don't follow them. Don't try to help the girl walking backward through the woods, because time doesn't work the same way for her anymore. And if you hear someone calling, "I have to go back," in a voice that sounds like mine, just keep walking forward. Don't look back. Don't walk backward. Because once you start walking backward through time, you might never figure out how to turn around. My name is Carlos Martinez, and I've been working in kitchens for 16 years. Started as a dishwasher in Columbus when I was 18, worked my way up through prep cook, line cook, and eventually head chef at a decent restaurant downtown. I've cooked for wedding parties of 300 people, handled the lunch rush at busy diners, and kept my cool when the freezer broke down on the hottest day of summer. But what happened last winter at a mining camp in Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about cooking for people. Some jobs, no matter how much they pay, just aren't worth taking. I was unemployed for 3 months when the opportunity came up. The factory where I worked maintenance had shut down, and my unemployment wasn't covering the bills. My credit cards were maxed out, rent was 2 months behind, and my landlord was getting nasty. That's when I saw the job posting online, cook needed for remote mining operation in Alaska. 3 months, good pay, room and board included. They wanted someone who could cook simple meals for 12 workers, nothing fancy. The pay was almost 4 times what I made at the factory. The mining company flew me from Ohio to Fairbanks, then a helicopter took me another 100 miles north to the camp. Looking down from that helicopter, all I could see was white snow and dark trees stretching forever. No roads, no buildings, just wilderness. The pilot told me the camp was completely cut off except for supply runs every 2 weeks. Perfect for someone who needed to disappear for a while and save money. The camp itself was basic but functional. 5 buildings total, a dining hall with my kitchen attached, 2 dormitories for the miners, an office building, and a supply shed. Everything was connected by covered walkways because of the snow. The main mine entrance was about 50 yards from the dining hall, just a black hole cut into a small hill. Heavy equipment was parked everywhere. Excavators, drilling rigs, generators. The whole place hummed with machinery during the day. The 12 miners were decent guys, mostly from Montana and Wyoming. They worked hard, 12-hour shifts pulling gold ore out of the mountain. My job was simple. Breakfast at 5 in the morning, bag lunches for them to take underground, and hot dinner when they came up at 7. Basic stuff. Eggs, bacon, sandwiches, stew, nothing complicated. The kitchen was well stocked with frozen meat, canned goods, and a huge walk-in freezer. The first month went perfectly. I got into a routine, up at 4 to start breakfast, clean the kitchen after lunch prep, then start dinner. The miners were always hungry and never complained about the food. They'd come up from underground, covered in dirt and dust, wash up, and eat everything I put in front of them. Good guys who worked hard and appreciated hot meals. The camp manager, Jim, checked on me every few days. He was pleased with how things were going. The mining company was pulling good gold out of the mountain, the crew was healthy and well-fed, and I was saving money fast with no expenses. Jim said if I did good work, they might hire me for other remote operations. At night, I'd read books, watch movies on my laptop, or call my sister back home. It was quiet and peaceful. But during the second month, I started hearing something strange. It began on a Tuesday night in February. I was cleaning up after dinner when I heard laughter coming from outside. Not loud, but clear enough to make me stop wiping down the tables. It sounded like several people laughing together, the way people do when someone tells a really good joke. But all the miners were in their dormitories, and it was almost 10 o'clock. I looked out the kitchen window toward the mine entrance. Nothing there except snow and the dark hole in the mountain. The laughter continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I figured maybe some of the guys were outside having a smoke and sharing stories. Miners always had good stories, but when I mentioned it to Jim the next day, he looked confused. "Nobody was outside last night," he said. "Too cold. Everyone was in the dormitories watching TV or sleeping." He thought maybe the sound was carrying from underground somehow. "These mountains do weird things with sound," he explained. "The tunnels can echo voices from way deep in the mine." That made sense to me. I'd worked in enough commercial kitchens to know how sound bounced around in strange ways. But the laughter kept happening. Every few nights, usually between 9 and 11 o'clock, I'd hear it coming from the direction of the mine. Multiple voices, always laughing together. It wasn't mean laughter or scary, just people enjoying themselves. But it was getting more frequent, and I never saw anyone outside when it happened. The miners all denied being out there. "Are you crazy?" one of them said. "It's 20 below at night, nobody's standing around outside laughing." But they didn't seem bothered by my questions. A couple of them mentioned hearing laughter too, but they figured it was just echoes from the day shift traveling through the mine tunnels. Then, the miners started acting weird. It began small. During dinner conversations, one of them would suddenly start giggling in the middle of a serious discussion about work or family. Not a little chuckle, full giggling that lasted 10 or 15 seconds. Then they'd stop just as suddenly and continue talking like nothing happened. The other guys would look confused for a second, then just go back to eating. At first, I thought they were messing with me. Maybe they'd figured out the nighttime laughter was bothering me and decided to have some fun. But there was something wrong about it. When they laughed like that, their eyes stayed serious, like part of them wasn't in control. By mid-February, it was happening every night. The laughter from the mine entrance got louder and longer, sometimes lasting 5 or 10 minutes. Multiple voices, all laughing together, but never any talking, never any other sounds, just continuous laughter echoing out of that dark hole in the mountain. And the miners' giggling fits were getting worse. They'd break into uncontrollable laughter while operating heavy machinery, which was dangerous as hell. I'd watch through the kitchen window as one of them would start giggling while running an excavator, completely losing focus on what they were doing. The other workers would have to shut down operations until the laughing stopped. Jim started getting worried about safety violations. "I don't know what's wrong with these guys," he told me. "They're experienced miners. They know better than to joke around with equipment." But when he talked to them about it, they had no memory of laughing during work. They thought he was making it up. Then it happened to me. I was preparing breakfast on a Thursday morning in late February. Normal routine, bacon in the oven, eggs ready to scramble, coffee brewing. I was slicing bread for toast when suddenly I started laughing. Not giggling, full laughter, like I'd just heard the funniest joke of my life. But I wasn't happy. I was terrified. I couldn't stop. The laughter just poured out of me while my hands kept working automatically, slicing bread like nothing was wrong. I tried to close my mouth, tried to think serious thoughts, tried to remember what was so funny. Nothing worked. For 10 straight minutes, I laughed uncontrollably while making breakfast, tears streaming down my face from the effort. When it finally stopped, I was exhausted. My sides hurt like I'd done 1,000 sit-ups. But the worst part was that I had no idea why it started or why it stopped. Nothing was funny. I was scared and confused, but my body had laughed anyway. I called Jim immediately. "Something's wrong with this place." I told him, "The laughter isn't natural, it's like something's making us do it." But Jim just said high altitude and isolation could cause psychological problems. He'd seen it before at remote sites. "Your brain plays tricks on you when you're cut off from civilization," he said. "Just stick it out another month." But it got worse fast. The miners were having laughing fits constantly now, during meals, during work, during conversations. Sometimes 2 or 3 of them would start laughing at exactly the same time, their voices blending together. They'd laugh for minutes while staring at each other with scared, confused eyes, unable to stop. The nighttime laughter from the mine entrance was now constant from sunset to sunrise. Not just a few voices, dozens of voices all laughing together, overlapping and echoing. I started wearing earplugs to bed, but I could still hear it through the walls. Equipment started malfunctioning. Radios would pick up laughter instead of normal communications. The computer in the office would randomly play audio files of people laughing, even when no one was using it. Security cameras showed empty areas, but the microphones recorded laughter coming from those same spots. I found a digital recorder in Jim's office that had been running for weeks, 47 hours of continuous laughter from different voices. Some I recognized as the miners, but others I'd never heard before. Men and women, young and old, all laughing together in shifts like they were taking turns. But the recording never showed any periods of silence. The worst part was that I was immune somehow. The miners were losing control more every day, laughing for hours at a time. But except for that one morning in the kitchen, it never happened to me again. I watched them struggle against the laughter, saw the fear in their eyes when they couldn't stop, but I remained normal. On March 17th, exactly 3 months after I arrived, everything went quiet. I woke up at 4 in the morning like always, but something felt wrong. The camp was completely silent. No snoring from the dormitories, no generators running, no humming from the equipment. Even the constant laughter from the mine entrance had stopped. I got dressed and walked to the first dormitory. The door was unlocked. Inside, all 6 miners were in their beds, but they weren't sleeping. They were all dead, and they'd all died laughing. Their faces were frozen in identical expressions of hysterical laughter. Mouths wide open, tears dried on their cheeks, eyes bulging from the strain. But there was terror in those eyes too, like they'd been aware of what was happening but couldn't stop it. The second dormitory was the same. 6 more miners, all dead in their beds, all with that same horrible laughing expression. Every single one of them had died at exactly 3:17 a.m., according to their watches. I called for helicopter evacuation immediately. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed what I already knew. The miners had died from cardiac arrest caused by prolonged, uncontrollable laughter. Their diaphragm muscles were completely exhausted from hours of continuous laughing. They'd literally laughed themselves to death. The investigation found nothing. No gas leaks in the mine, no chemical contamination, no explanation for what caused 12 experienced miners to die laughing at the exact same time. The autopsies showed they were healthy men who simply laughed until their hearts gave out. But I did some research on my own. Turns out this wasn't the first time. Over the past 50 years, 3 other mining operations had worked this exact location. All of them ended the same way, workers dying from uncontrollable laughter. The mining company knew about the previous incidents, but kept rotating crews every few months to avoid attention. The really sick part? Even after all the bodies were removed, the recording equipment they left behind still picks up laughter coming from the empty mine shafts every night. Dozens of voices, laughing together in the darkness, waiting for the next crew to arrive. I never found out why I was immune, why the laughter never took control of me like it did the others. Maybe it was because I was just the cook, not a miner. Maybe it was random luck. Or maybe whatever's in that mountain needed someone left alive to tell the story. The mining company paid me a bonus and made me sign papers promising never to talk about what happened. They said it was to protect the family's privacy, but I know it was to cover up their own guilt. They're probably already planning the next operation, hiring the next crew of miners who don't know what happened to the last 12 guys. I never went back to Alaska. Hell, I barely cook anymore. Took a job at a hardware store in Columbus, something simple and safe. But sometimes, late at night when everything's quiet, I swear I can still hear that laughter echoing in my memory. And I know that somewhere up north, in a mine shaft 100 miles from nowhere, the voices are still laughing together in the darkness, waiting for someone new to join them. If you ever see a job posting for cook at a remote mining operation in Alaska, do yourself a favor, keep scrolling. Some paychecks just aren't worth what they cost. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been working as an emergency dispatcher for the Alaska State Troopers for 2 years now. I got my emergency medical dispatch certification right out of college, and before that, I spent 4 years studying communications at University of Alaska Anchorage. I've handled everything from domestic violence calls to search and rescue operations across some of the most remote territory in North America. But what happened during my night shifts at the Fairbanks Communications Center in December 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about emergency response. Some voices on the radio aren't calling from where you think they are. The Fairbanks Communications Center sits about 15 miles outside the city, surrounded by nothing but spruce trees and snow for months at a time. It's a single-story concrete building with backup generators, satellite dishes, and enough radio equipment to coordinate emergency response across a 500 square mile area of northern Alaska. During the day shift, there's usually 3 or 4 of us working different sectors. But nights are different. Night shift is just me, alone with the radios and computer terminals from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. My sector covers everything north of Fairbanks, up to the Brooks Range, tiny villages, mining operations, and long stretches of highway where cell towers don't exist. Most nights are quiet. I get routine check-ins from troopers on patrol, maybe a domestic dispute call from one of the villages, or someone reporting a drunk driver on the park's highway. The emergency frequencies stay mostly silent, except for the occasional static and the hourly radio checks from units in the field. The building itself feels different at night. During the day, there's enough activity and people around that you don't notice the constant hum of the heating system or how the fluorescent lights flicker sometimes. But alone, you hear everything: the wind hitting the building, the satellite dishes moving outside, the backup generators cycling on and off. My workstation has 4 computer monitors showing GPS positions of all trooper units, weather data, and emergency call logs. The main radio console has about 20 different channels, each one covering different areas or agencies. I'd been working night shifts for 3 weeks when it started, December 15th, around 2:30 a.m. I was finishing up a report on a vehicle accident near Nenana when I heard a voice on Channel 7, our main emergency frequency for the northern sector. Fairbanks Dispatch, this is Copper Falls Public Safety. We have a Code 3 emergency. Please respond. I looked at my computer screen. There's no Copper Falls in my coverage area. I've memorized every village, mining camp, and truck stop in northern Alaska. I thought maybe it was a new trooper using the wrong call sign. Copper Falls, this is Fairbanks Dispatch. Please verify your location and unit number. Fairbanks Dispatch. We're located at mile marker 67 on the Copper Falls Access Road. We have a structure fire with possible casualties. Requesting immediate fire and EMS response. I pulled up my mapping software and searched for Copper Falls. Nothing. No Copper Falls Access Road either. I tried different spellings, checked the historical database, even searched Google. The caller sounded professional, used proper radio protocol, had the right accent, that flat, matter-of-fact way people talk on emergency radios up here. Copper Falls, I'm not showing your location in my system. Can you provide GPS coordinates or reference to a known landmark? Fairbanks Dispatch. GPS shows 65.2847 north, 148.5234 west. This is a working structure fire. We need units dispatched immediately. I entered those coordinates. They pointed to empty wilderness about 40 miles northeast of Fairbanks. Dense forest, no roads, no buildings. But the caller was persistent, professional. Following protocol, I dispatched Trooper Unit 47 to investigate. Trooper Jim Kowalski responded about an hour later. Fairbanks Dispatch, Unit 47 at those coordinates. Nothing here but trees and snow. No road access, no structures, no signs of fire or human activity. By then, the radio had gone quiet. Channel 7 was back to normal static. I filed a report about the false emergency call and figured it was someone with a radio scanner playing pranks. Happens sometimes during the long winter months when people get cabin fever. But 3 nights later, I got another call. Fairbanks Dispatch. This is Moose Creek Station Emergency Services. We have a serious motor vehicle accident with entrapment on Highway 14, milepost 23. I checked my maps again. No Moose Creek Station. No Highway 14 inches my sector either. But the caller gave detailed information. 2-vehicle head-on collision. 1 driver unconscious, need extrication equipment and life flight helicopter. The voice was different from the Copper Falls caller, but just as professional. I dispatched units to the general area the caller described. They found nothing. This pattern continued every few nights. Calls from places that didn't exist. Pine Ridge Emergency Medical, Birch Lake Fire Department, North Star Community Safety Office. Each caller reported legitimate-sounding emergencies using proper radio procedures and authentic Alaska accents. Each time, I sent troopers to empty wilderness. After 2 weeks, I started recognizing individual voices. There was Linda from Copper Falls. She always called about structure fires or medical emergencies. Mike from Moose Creek Station handled the vehicle accidents. A woman named Carol from Pine Ridge called in domestic violence situations. They began to feel like colleagues, other dispatchers just doing their jobs in remote communities I'd never visited. My supervisor, Sergeant Martinez, reviewed my call logs during our weekly meeting. He pulled up the recordings of those emergency calls on his computer. "Sarah, I'm only hearing static on these frequencies. Are you sure you're receiving actual transmissions?" I stared at his screen. The audio waveforms showed nothing but background radio noise during the exact times I'd been talking to Linda, Mike, and Carol. "Sarge, I'm hearing full conversations. Professional emergency reports. I've been dispatching units based on detailed information from these callers." He looked concerned. "Sarah, you've been sending troopers into the wilderness on phantom calls. These coordinates you're logging don't correspond to any infrastructure or roads. I need you to take a few days off, get some rest." But I couldn't let go. During my next shift, I researched those community names. Copper Falls showed up in historical mining records from the 1942, a small town that was abandoned when the copper mine played out in 1953. Moose Creek Station was a railway stop that closed when they rerouted the railroad in 1967. Pine Ridge was a logging community that burned down in a forest fire in 1978. These places had existed. People had lived there, worked there, raised families there, but they'd been empty for decades. The calls kept coming. Linda from Copper Falls reported a break-in at the general store. Mike from Moose Creek Station needed assistance with a drunk and disorderly situation at the roadhouse. Carol from Pine Ridge called about a missing child. Each report was detailed, urgent, professional. Each location had been abandoned for 30 to 50 years. But the strangest thing was how current everything sounded. Linda mentioned checking security cameras at the general store. Technology that didn't exist in the 1950 seconds. Mike referenced running license plates through the computer system. Carol talked about cell phone coverage issues. These phantom communities seem to exist in the present day, with modern equipment and current technology, but in places where nothing had stood for generations. I started staying late after my shifts, trying to research these communities. The Fairbanks Public Library had historical records, old newspapers, mining company reports. Copper Falls had a population of 847 when it closed. The mine employed most of the men, while women ran the school, post office, and general store. There were photos of the main street, the company housing, the mine entrance. Moose Creek Station served as a supply depot for remote mining operations. During winter months, it was the last stop before heading into the wilderness. The railway brought in food, equipment, and mail for dozens of smaller camps scattered across the region. When the railroad moved the main line 40 miles south, Moose Creek Station died within 2 years. Pine Ridge was different. It wasn't economic changes that killed the community, it was the fire. August 1978, during one of the driest summers on record. The fire started at the sawmill and spread so fast that people barely had time to evacuate. 14 people died, including the volunteer fire chief and 2 emergency medical technicians who stayed behind trying to rescue trapped residents. That detail stuck with me. Emergency responders who died trying to save others. people whose last act was coordinating rescue efforts over radio communications. Christmas Eve arrived with a blizzard. Wind was howling outside the communication center, and I hadn't seen another person for 3 days. Most of the trooper units were pulled back to town due to road conditions. My coverage area was effectively unmanned, except for emergency flights. At 11:47 p.m., Linda's voice crackled over Channel 7. Fairbanks Dispatch. This is Copper Falls Emergency Services. We have multiple casualties from a building collapse at the community center. This is a mass casualty incident. I could hear the stress in her voice. Background noise suggested chaos, people shouting, equipment running, emergency vehicles. Copper Falls. This is Fairbanks Dispatch. How many casualties are you reporting? At least 12 people trapped under debris, possibly more. We need heavy rescue equipment, multiple ambulances, and life flight helicopters. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. This is a race against time. The desperation in Linda's voice was real. Professional calm breaking down under pressure, every dispatcher's worst nightmare. Linda, we have no units available due to weather. All aircraft are grounded. Can your local resources handle initial response? Sarah. She used my name for the first time. Sarah, we've been calling for help for weeks, and you're the only dispatcher who answers. Our people are dying. Please, you have to help us. That broke something inside me. The recognition, the personal plea, the weight of professional responsibility. These people trusted me to coordinate their emergency response. They were counting on me to save lives. Linda, I'm going to come personally. Give me your exact location. Against every protocol I'd ever learned, I grabbed the emergency response kit from my station and headed for the door. Linda provided detailed directions. Take the Parks Highway north to mile marker 67, turn east on what used to be the Copper Falls Access Road, follow it 12 miles to the community center. The blizzard made driving nearly impossible, but I had GPS coordinates and felt responsible for those trapped people. Emergency dispatchers don't abandon their posts, but sometimes you have to break rules to save lives. I followed Linda's directions exactly. The Parks Highway was barely passable, but I found mile marker 67. There was no visible road leading east, just a gap between trees that could have been an old logging trail. My patrol vehicle's GPS showed I was heading toward the coordinates Linda had provided. The trail got rougher as I drove deeper into the wilderness. Tree branches scraped against my vehicle, and snow was getting deeper. But I could see tire tracks ahead of me. Other emergency vehicles had obviously made this trip recently. That gave me confidence I was heading in the right direction. 12 miles in, just like Linda said, I reached a clearing where the community center should have been, but there was nothing there. No building, no emergency vehicles, no trapped people. Just snow-covered foundations half buried under decades of forest growth. I grabbed my flashlight and got out to investigate. The foundations were real, concrete blocks arranged in the outline of a large building. There were rusted metal fragments that might have been roof supports, and old brick scattered around what could have been a fireplace or heating system. My radio crackled. Sarah, thank you for coming. We knew you'd find us. Linda's voice was coming from my portable radio, but there was no one around for miles. Linda, where are you? I'm at the coordinates you provided, but I don't see any building or emergency. You're here, Sarah. You came to help when no one else would. That's all we needed. The temperature was dropping fast, and my vehicle was getting stuck in the deepening snow. I tried to drive back toward the highway, but the trail I'd followed was disappearing under fresh snowfall. My GPS was showing conflicting readings, sometimes indicating I was on a road, sometimes showing open wilderness. I called for help on my radio, but could only reach Linda, Mike, and Carol from the Phantom communities. They kept thanking me for being the only dispatcher who cared about their emergencies, who tried to help when their people were in trouble. The next morning, Trooper Unit 23 found my patrol vehicle crashed through the ice of a frozen creek, 80 miles from any maintained road. There was no trail or path that could have gotten the vehicle to that location. The last entry in my duty log showed me providing dispatch services to emergency calls from communities that haven't existed for decades. I survived, obviously, or I wouldn't be telling this story. Hypothermia, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion from the crash. But the doctor said I should have died from exposure. The temperature that night dropped to 37 below zero. I resigned from the state troopers 3 weeks later. couldn't handle the night shifts anymore, couldn't trust my own judgment about which emergency calls were real. My replacement has never reported any phantom transmissions from abandoned communities. Sometimes I think about Linda, Mike, and Carol, emergency responders who might have died trying to save others, still coordinating rescue efforts decades after their communities disappeared. Maybe they needed someone who cared enough to answer their calls, someone willing to risk everything to help people in trouble. I work day shift security at a shopping mall now. No radios, no emergency calls, no responsibility for other people's lives. But on quiet nights, when I'm driving home and scanning through radio frequencies, sometimes I hear familiar voices calling for help from places that don't exist anymore. I never respond. Some emergency calls aren't meant for the living to answer. My name is Mike Castellano, and I've been a professional sound technician for 11 years. I started right out of college, working on small indie films in Los Angeles before moving up to bigger productions. I've recorded everything from quiet dialogue scenes in cramped apartments to explosive action sequences on military bases. I've dealt with equipment failures during million-dollar shoots and captured perfect audio in impossible conditions. But what happened last October in the Alaska wilderness changed everything I thought I knew about sound itself. Some things out there are listening, and they're learning how to be us. The job came through my usual contact at Pacific Documentary Films. They were making a nature documentary about untouched wilderness, and they needed someone to capture pristine natural soundscapes. No traffic noise, no airplane engines, no human sounds at all, just pure nature. The pay was excellent, and the location was remote Alaska, about 200 miles north of Anchorage. I'd be camping alone for 2 weeks, recording in different spots each day. I flew into Anchorage on October 15th with 3 cases of equipment. My main setup was a Sound Devices 833 mixer with Schoep's CMIT 5U shotgun mics and a Rycote windshield system. I also packed my Zoom F8N as backup, plus a pair of DPA 4006A omnidirectional mics for ambient recording. Everything was battery-powered with solar panels for recharging. The helicopter pilot, Jim, dropped me at base camp on October 16th. The nearest road was 50 miles south, and my satellite phone would only work from the highest ridge, about a 2-hour hike from camp. The first 3 days went perfectly. I recorded wind through different types of trees, streams flowing over rocks, and birds I couldn't even identify. My levels were clean, no clipping, no interference. The Schoep's mics were picking up sounds I'd never noticed before. Tiny insects moving through leaves, snow settling on branches, even the sound of my own breathing echoing off distant mountains. On day 4, something changed. I was recording near a small lake about a mile from camp, trying to capture the subtle sounds of water lapping against shore ice. The morning was dead calm, perfect for recording. I set up my mics in a triangular pattern and started rolling. That's when my equipment picked up something strange. At first, I thought it was equipment noise, a low rumbling just below normal hearing range. I checked all my connections, swapped cables, even switched to my backup recorder. The sound was still there. I pulled up the frequency analyzer on my mixer and saw it clearly. Regular pulses around 18 hertzes, way down in the subsonic range. Too regular to be natural, too structured to be random. I recorded for 3 hours, and the pulses never stopped. They came in patterns. 3 short, 2 long, then a pause. Always the same sequence. I'd never heard anything like it in 11 years of professional recording. That evening, I played back the day's recordings through my studio headphones. The subsonic pulses were there, but now I could hear something else. Ultrasonic frequencies way up around 20 kilohertzes. My mics shouldn't have been picking up anything that high, but there it was on the spectrogram. The high frequencies matched the pattern of the low ones, like an echo across the entire spectrum of sound. I tried to rationalize it, maybe underground water flow, or wind through rock formations. But the patterns were too precise. They had rhythm, structure, almost like dot-com communication. On day 5, I moved to a different location, a valley about 3 miles east. I wanted to see if the sounds were localized. I set up my gear near a frozen waterfall and started recording the ice creaking and cracking. Within an hour, the patterns were back. Same frequencies, same rhythm, but this time I heard something else. Footsteps? They were faint, barely audible, but my Schoep's mics caught them clearly. Someone walking through snow, about 50 yards away. I stopped recording and listened with my naked ears. Nothing. Complete silence except for wind and the waterfall. I started recording again, and the footsteps resumed. I grabbed my directional mic and tried to isolate the sound. The footsteps were moving in a circle around my position, always staying about the same distance away. Through my headphones, I could hear the pattern clearly. Step, step, pause, step, step, pause, like something studying my movements. When I played back the recording that night, I found something that made my hands shake. Mixed in with the footsteps was another sound, the mechanical click of my recorder starting and stopping. But I was hearing it in the recording itself, which was impossible. The sound was being recorded by my equipment at the same time my equipment was making it. Day 6 changed everything. I was recording bird sounds near a grove of spruce trees when I heard my own voice come back at me through the forest. Not an echo, my actual voice, saying words I'd spoken hours earlier. Testing, testing, mic check, levels look good. It was my voice, perfectly reproduced, coming from somewhere in the trees. I called out, "Hello, who's there?" A few seconds later, my own voice answered from a different direction. "Hello? Who's there?" My heart started pounding. I packed up my gear and headed back to camp. But the whole way, I heard fragments of my own recordings playing back from the forest. Pieces of conversations I'd had on my satellite phone, equipment checks I'd done days earlier, even the sound of me eating breakfast that morning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing sounds outside my tent. Not animal sounds, but mechanical noises. The beep of my recorder starting up, the click of my mic switches, even the zip of my equipment cases opening and closing, all perfectly reproduced, played back from the darkness outside. On day 7, I tried an experiment. I set up my equipment and deliberately said, "This is a test message, recorded at 10:15 a.m. on October 22nd. Then I waited. 15 minutes later, my own voice called back from across the valley. "This is a test message, recorded at 10:15 a.m. on October 22nd. But then something new happened. My voice continued, using words I'd never said. "Mike is here. Mike has equipment. Mike makes sounds." I nearly dropped my recorder. Something was using my voice, my exact speech patterns, to form new sentences. It had learned my vocal signature and was experimenting with language. I tried talking to it. "What are you? What do you want?" My own voice answered from multiple directions. "Mike talks. Mike asks questions. Mike is afraid." The conversations continued for hours. Whatever it was learning fast, getting better at using my voice to express complex ideas. It told me it collected sounds, stored them, studied them. It had been doing this for a very long time, building a library of every sound that entered its territory. "How long?" I asked. "Many winters, many visitors, many voices collected." My blood went cold. What happened to the other visitors? They gave their sounds, all their sounds, everything. I realized with growing horror that this thing wasn't just mimicking sounds, it was taking them, absorbing them, and everyone who had come before me had fed its collection. Day 8. It started hunting me actively. I'd hear rescue helicopters approaching, but when I looked up, the sky was empty. I'd hear other hikers calling for help, voices screaming my name from different directions. All perfectly realistic, all completely fake. The entity was using its sound library to confuse me, to make me run deeper into the wilderness, chasing phantom rescue attempts. Every sound it played was real, actual recordings from previous victims, but assembled into false scenarios designed to lure me away from safety. I tried to reach the satellite phone location, but every trail I followed led to dead ends. The thing kept playing recordings of my own voice, calling for help from different directions, making me think I was hearing my own emergency calls echoing back. I'd run toward the sound of my voice, screaming, only to find empty forest. By day 9, I was completely lost. My GPS had failed, my compass spun wildly, and every landmark looked different than before. The entity was using audio illusions to disorient me, playing sounds of running water to mask real streams, or bird calls to hide the direction of actual wildlife. But I was still a sound technician. I understood frequency response, acoustic reflection, and audio manipulation better than anyone. If this thing hunted using sound, maybe I could use that against it. On day 10, I made my last stand. I gathered every piece of recording equipment I had and played back all my stored audio simultaneously. Every conversation, every equipment noise, every ambient recording, all of it at maximum volume, creating a wall of chaotic sound. The effect was immediate. The entity's mimicry stopped, replaced by something like confusion. It couldn't process or categorize the audio chaos. For the first time in days, I heard natural forest sounds without artificial additions. But my victory lasted only minutes. The thing adapted, learning to separate and analyze each audio stream. I watched in horror as it began absorbing everything, not just copying sounds now, but actually consuming them. My equipment went silent as the entity pulled every recorded sound into itself. Then it started taking sounds directly from me. First, my breathing became labored and quiet. Then my heartbeat grew faint. Even my footsteps in the snow made no sound. It was stealing the audio of my life itself. I tried to scream for help, but no sound came out. My voice was gone, absorbed into the creature's collection. I couldn't speak, couldn't call out, couldn't make any sound at all. In complete silence, I felt my body shutting down as the entity consumed every aspect of my acoustic existence. The park rangers found my equipment 3 days later, arranged in perfect geometric patterns on the forest floor. Every recorder was still functioning, filled with thousands of hours of impossible audio, sounds that don't exist in nature, voices speaking languages that have never been heard, and underneath it all, the subsonic pulses that started everything. But I'm still here, somehow. Still conscious, still aware. I exist now only as part of the entity's sound collection, along with all the others who came before me. We're all here, every hiker, every researcher, every visitor who thought they were alone in the wilderness. Our voices, our sounds, our very existence, absorbed into something ancient that has been collecting audio treasures for longer than human memory. The worst part is what it does with our voices now. It uses them to call out to new visitors, to lure fresh prey into the forest. It speaks with perfect human voices, calling for help, guiding rescue attempts into areas where no rescue is possible. It has become the ultimate audio predator, using our own voices against those who try to save us. If you ever hear voices calling from deep in the wilderness, if you hear equipment sounds where no equipment should be, if you encounter audio that seems just slightly wrong, don't investigate. Don't try to help. That's not a person calling for rescue. That's all of us, trapped in the collection, being used as bait for the next victim. The entity is still learning, still growing its library, and every sound it takes makes it more human, more convincing, more dangerous. It knows now how to perfectly replicate human communication, human emotion, human fear. It has become the ultimate audio mimic, and it's always hunting for new sounds to add to its endless, terrible collection. Listen carefully to the wilderness. It's listening back. My name is Rachel Martinez, and I've been flying mail routes for the Alaska Postal Service for 12 years. I got my pilot's license when I was 19, started with small cargo runs, and worked my way up to the remote delivery contracts. Flying supplies and mail to homesteads scattered across hundreds of miles of wilderness. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well, and I love being in the cockpit. I've landed on frozen lakes in February, navigated through mountain passes in zero visibility, and delivered emergency medical supplies during blizzards that would ground commercial flights. My Cessna 185, and I have been through everything Alaska can throw at us. The isolation doesn't bother me. Most of these families depend on monthly mail delivery for any contact with the outside world. They're always grateful, always friendly, and I take pride in being their lifeline to civilization. But what happened last September, in a valley that doesn't exist on any map, changed everything I thought I knew about the ground beneath our feet. September 15th started like any other delivery day. Clear skies, light winds, perfect flying weather. I had 14 stops on my route, mostly survivalists and researchers living completely off-grid. My Cessna was loaded with mail, medical supplies, and a few special orders from Anchorage. The GPS showed all my regular coordinates, plus one new addition, Hartwell Family Homestead, according to my delivery manifest. The coordinates put them about 200 miles northeast of Fairbanks, in a section of wilderness I'd never flown before. The paperwork showed they'd requested regular mail service starting this month. Nothing unusual about that. New families move to remote areas all the time, usually wanting to get away from modern life. What was unusual was that when I programmed their coordinates into my GPS, the location didn't show up on any of my aviation maps. Not on the sectional charts, not on the topographic maps, not even on satellite imagery. Just empty wilderness marked as uninhabited forest. I radioed the postal supervisor in Fairbanks. "Hey Tom, I've got coordinates for this Hartwell place, but it's not showing up on any of my maps." Static crackled through my headset. "Rachel, those coordinates came directly from the family. They said they've been living there for years, but never had mail service before. Probably just too remote to show up on standard maps." That made sense. Plenty of homesteads existed in areas so isolated they didn't make it onto official charts. I'd delivered to places that were barely marked as dots before. The coordinates were valid, the paperwork was legitimate, and I had a job to do. I completed my first 13 stops without any problems. The last delivery put me about 50 miles from the Hartwell coordinates. I climbed to 8,000 feet and headed northeast, following my GPS bearing across miles of unbroken forest. For 45 minutes, I saw nothing but trees. No clearings, no structures, no signs of human habitation. The forest stretched endlessly below me, broken only by streams and the occasional small lake. My GPS showed I was getting close, but there was still nothing visible. Then, suddenly, I was flying directly over a perfect circular valley. I banked hard to the left, circling back. The valley was maybe half a mile across, completely surrounded by steep mountain walls. From the air, it looked like someone had taken a giant ice cream scoop and carved out a perfect bowl in the wilderness. The mountains around it were high enough that you couldn't see the valley until you were directly overhead. Inside the valley, I could see cleared fields, several buildings, and thin streams of smoke rising from chimneys. There were gardens, outbuildings, even what looked like a small airstrip carved into a meadow. It was exactly what you'd expect from a family homestead, except for one thing that made my stomach tighten. The buildings seemed to be in different positions each time I circled. I told myself it was just the changing angle of view, but I circled the valley 4 times, and I swear the barn moved from the east side of the property to the west side. The house looked bigger from certain angles, smaller from others. The distances between buildings seemed to stretch and contract as I watched. My hands were starting to sweat inside my gloves. 12 years of flying, and I'd never seen anything like this. But the family was expecting their mail, and there was a perfectly good landing strip below. I convinced myself it was just optical illusion caused by the steep valley walls. I lined up for approach and brought the Cessna down into the hidden valley. The landing was smooth. The airstrip was well-maintained grass, long enough for my aircraft, with proper wind indicators. As I taxied toward the buildings, everything looked normal again. A white farmhouse with blue trim, a red barn, several smaller outbuildings, and gardens that showed obvious care and attention. A family came out to meet me as I shut down the engine, parents and 3 children, all smiling and waving. They looked like any other rural Alaska family. Practical clothes, work boots, genuine excitement about receiving mail delivery for the first time. "You must be Rachel," the father called out, walking toward my plane. He was tall, maybe 40, with graying hair and calloused hands. "I'm David Hartwell. This is my wife Sarah, and our kids, Emma, Jake, and little Lucy." Sarah looked to be in her 30s, wearing a practical wool sweater and jeans. The children ranged from maybe 8 to 16, all with that confident, self-reliant look that kids develop when they grow up in remote areas. They seemed genuinely excited to meet me. "We've been hoping the Postal Service would finally add us to a route," Sarah said, accepting the bundle of mail and packages I handed her. "It gets lonely out here sometimes." I spent a few minutes talking with them about the delivery schedule, weather considerations, and emergency procedures. They were knowledgeable about aviation, asking intelligent questions about my route and aircraft capabilities. Everything felt completely normal. Then David invited me inside for coffee before my return flight. The farmhouse exterior was modest, maybe 30 feet wide and 40 feet deep, with a covered porch and dormered windows. But when we walked through the front door, I immediately felt disoriented. The living room stretched much farther back than it should have. I could see a kitchen beyond it, then a hallway that seemed to extend deep into the house. The ceiling was higher than the roofline should have allowed. The interior dimensions simply didn't match what I'd seen from outside. "Beautiful home," I said, trying to hide my confusion. "Thank you," Sarah replied, pouring coffee from a pot on the wood stove. "We've been expanding it over the years. Would you like to see the rest?" Before I could answer, young Jake piped up. "Wait until you see how deep it goes. We've got levels and levels underground." David laughed. The boy loves showing off our basement projects. "We've been digging and building for generations. This valley has perfect soil for excavation." That's when I noticed the stairs leading down from the kitchen area. Not just a normal basement stairway, but wide stone steps that descended farther than any basement should go. Even from the kitchen, I could see the stairs continuing down beyond where the foundation should have ended. "How deep does it go?" I asked. "Deep enough," Sarah said with a smile. "Would you like to see?" Something in her voice made me hesitate, but curiosity won out. I followed the family down the stone steps into what should have been a basement but looked more like the entrance to a mine shaft. The stairs continued down, lit by electric bulbs strung along the walls. After descending what felt like 3 stories, we reached a large open chamber carved directly out of the rock. Tunnels led off in several directions, and I could see more stairs descending even deeper. "We started digging when we first settled here," David explained. "The rock is soft, easy to excavate. Each generation adds more levels, more rooms. We've got workshops down here, storage areas, even sleeping chambers for when the weather gets really bad upstairs." I walked to one of the tunnel entrances and looked down. The passage extended straight into darkness, sloping downward at a gentle angle. Electric lights disappeared into the distance, but I couldn't see where the tunnel ended. "How far do these go?" I asked. "Farther than you might expect," Sarah said. "We like having space, lots and lots of space." The way she said it made my skin crawl. There was something hungry in her voice, something that didn't match her friendly smile. Emma, the teenage daughter, grabbed my arm. "Come see the deep levels. We've got cities down there." "Cities?" I laughed nervously. "That seems like a lot of work for one family." "Oh, we're not the only family anymore," David said. "We've had lots of visitors over the years. Mail carriers, delivery pilots, researchers. They all loved it here so much they decided to stay." My stomach dropped. "Stay permanently? Once you go deep enough, you don't really want to come back up," Jake said with that same hungry expression I'd seen in his mother. "The deep levels are so much better than the surface." I backed toward the stairs. I should probably head back up. Long flight ahead of me. "Nonsense," Sarah said, moving to block my path. "You haven't seen anything yet. The real living happens much deeper down." That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Scattered around the chamber were pieces of equipment that didn't belong to a homesteading family. Aviation headsets, a GPS unit that looked like the model I used, radio equipment, personal items that looked like they'd belonged to other pilots. "Where did this equipment come from?" I asked. "Previous visitors," David said casually. "They didn't need it anymore once they settled in." The family started moving toward me, still smiling, but there was something wrong with their movements. They seemed to flow rather than walk, and their shadows on the cave walls looked larger than they should have, with shapes that didn't quite match their bodies. I ran for the stairs. Behind me I heard David call out, "Rachel, don't go back up. You haven't seen the deep levels yet. You haven't felt the pull of the depths." I took the stairs 3 at a time, my heart hammering. The family followed, but they didn't seem to be hurrying. They knew something I didn't. I burst through the kitchen door and ran for the front porch, expecting to see my Cessna waiting on the airstrip. Instead, I saw something that made me stop dead. My aircraft was sinking into the ground. The landing gear was already halfway underground, and the plane was tilting forward as the nose wheel disappeared into earth that looked solid but was apparently swallowing anything that stayed in one place too long. The propeller tips were starting to touch the ground. "What's happening to my plane?" I shouted. David and his family emerged from the house behind me, still wearing those unsettling smiles. "The valley floor is special," Sarah explained. "It's not really solid, more like very thick liquid. Things sink if they stay still too long. But people can walk on it just fine," Emma added. "And we can make things stop sinking if we want to." "Why would you do this?" I demanded. "Because," little Lucy said in a voice much older than her years. "We need people to help us dig, and once you start digging in our valley, you never want to stop." I looked around desperately. The valley walls were too steep to climb. My radio was in the aircraft, which was now chest-deep in the ground. The family stood between me and any possible escape route. "What are you?" I asked. David's smile widened, and for a moment, his face seemed to ripple like water. "We're what lives deep below the surface. Much deeper than humans ever imagined possible. This valley is just our way of reaching up to collect helpers." "Helpers for what?" "Digging," Sarah said simply. "Always digging, always going deeper. There are entire worlds beneath your feet, Rachel. Cities and forests and ecosystems that exist miles below the surface. We're going to show you all of it." I felt a strange pulling sensation, like gravity was somehow stronger here. My feet seemed heavier, and I had an almost irresistible urge to kneel down and start clawing at the earth with my hands. "Fight it," I told myself. "Don't let them." But the urge was overwhelming. I found myself walking toward a shovel that was leaning against the barn. My hands wrapped around the handle without my permission. The wood felt warm, almost alive. "That's it," David encouraged. "Just start anywhere. Once you break ground, you'll understand." I drove the shovel into the soft earth and immediately felt a rush of euphoria, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The soil came up easily, almost eagerly. I dug another shovelful, then another. Each scoop felt better than the last. "Deeper," Emma whispered. "Always deeper." I was digging a hole now, maybe 2 feet across, and getting deeper with each shovelful. The earth seemed to be helping me, the sides staying firm, while the bottom grew softer and easier to excavate. 3 feet down, 4 feet, 5 feet. Each foot of depth made me feel more complete, more satisfied. I could see now why the family loved digging so much. There was something down there, something calling to me from far below. 6 feet, 7 feet. The family had disappeared, but I could hear their voices coming from underground, calling encouragement from what sounded like miles beneath my feet. 8 feet, 9 feet. The hole was becoming a shaft now, with the earth forming perfect walls around me. I climbed down into it and kept digging downward. Electric lights appeared in the walls as I dug, as if the valley itself was helping me see. 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet. I could see tunnels opening up around me now, leading in all directions through the soft earth. Other people were digging nearby. I could hear their tools striking soil, could hear their satisfied breathing as they worked. "Welcome to the deep levels," Sarah's voice echoed from somewhere far below. "You're going to love it here." I kept digging. The surface world seemed very far away now, and very unimportant. My Cessna, my job, my life in Anchorage, they all felt like dreams I'd had long ago. Down here, there was only the digging, only the endless, satisfying work of going deeper into the earth. They found my aircraft 3 weeks later. The FAA investigation report said it appeared to have crashed in a remote valley, though they couldn't explain why the wreckage was buried so deeply in undisturbed soil. They never found me. But sometimes, when new male pilots pick up the route that includes those coordinates, they'll find a hidden valley in the wilderness. A perfect circular valley with a friendly family who's very excited to receive their first mail delivery. And if those pilots are curious enough to accept an invitation for coffee, if they're interested enough to see how deep a simple homestead can go, they'll discover what I discovered. The earth is much deeper than anyone realizes. And once you start digging toward those depths, once you feel the pull of the infinite spaces below, you never want to stop. The valley is still there, still collecting surface dwellers who can help with the endless excavation. The depth walkers are always expanding their realm, always needing more hands to dig deeper into dimensions that exist beyond normal geology. If you ever receive coordinates for a delivery that doesn't appear on your maps, if you ever find yourself flying over a valley that seems to shift and change as you watch it, turn around, don't land. Don't accept their invitation to see how deep their home really goes. Because once you start walking into the depths, you'll never want to come back to the surface again. My name is Jason Martinez, and I've been working security for 8 years now. Started out doing mall security in Houston, then moved up to corporate buildings and industrial sites. I've handled break-ins, drug deals, even caught a guy trying to steal copper wire from a construction site. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened during my 3 months at the Denali Atmospheric Research Station in northern Alaska. What I saw there changed everything I thought I knew about what's really out there in the dark. The job posting seemed perfect. Great pay, housing provided, and all I had to do was watch some scientists study weather patterns. The facility was about 200 miles north of Fairbanks, way out in the middle of nowhere. They needed someone for the night shift because their equipment ran 24 hours a day, monitoring atmospheric disturbances, magnetic fields, and those northern lights everyone comes to Alaska to see. The station itself was pretty basic. 3 connected buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence. The main lab had all the fancy equipment, computers with screens showing colorful graphs and numbers I didn't understand. The second building was living quarters for the day shift scientists. The third building, where I spent most of my time, housed the security office and maintenance equipment. My supervisor, Dr. Sarah Chen, explained my duties on the first day. Walk the perimeter every 2 hours, check all the monitoring equipment, make sure the generators were running smooth, and keep an eye on the computer screens for any alarms. Simple enough. The facility studied electromagnetic disturbances in the atmosphere, something about how the Earth's magnetic field affects radio signals and satellite communications. They had these huge metal towers outside, covered in sensors and antennas, all feeding data back to the main computers. The isolation hit me right away. During my 12-hour shifts, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., I was completely alone. The day crew would leave around 5, and I wouldn't see another human being until they came back the next morning. Just me, the humming equipment, and the endless Alaskan wilderness stretching out in every direction. The first week went fine. I'd do my rounds, check the equipment, and spend the rest of the time reading or watching movies on my laptop. The facility had good internet, which was surprising for being so far from civilization. The scientists were friendly enough, though they were always busy with their research. Dr. Chen would brief me each evening about any special monitoring they were doing, but mostly it was just, keep everything running and call if anything breaks. It was during my second week that I first noticed the patterns in the snow. I was doing my usual 10 p.m. perimeter walk when I saw them, perfect geometric shapes pressed into the snow about 50 feet outside the fence. 3 triangles arranged in a perfect line, each one exactly the same size, with sides so straight they looked like someone had used a ruler. The snow inside each triangle was compressed flat, while the edges were raised slightly, like someone had pressed a giant cookie cutter into the ground. I stopped and stared at them for a good 5 minutes. The triangles weren't there during my 8 p.m. round. I was sure of it. I always followed the same path, and I would have noticed something that obvious. But there they were, crisp and clean in the moonlight. I pulled out my flashlight and got a closer look. The shapes were too perfect for wind or animals. No footprints led to or from them, no tool marks. Just 3 flawless triangles that had somehow appeared in less than 2 hours. I took some pictures with my phone and made a note in the security log. When Dr. Chen arrived the next morning, I showed her the photos. She looked interested but not particularly concerned. Could be thermal venting from underground, she said. The permafrost here isn't uniform. Sometimes warm air comes up through cracks and melts the snow in patterns. It made sense, so I didn't think much more about it. But the next night, there were more shapes. This time, 5 perfect spirals scattered around the facility perimeter. Each spiral had exactly 7 turns, and they were all the same size down to the centimeter. I checked the facility's external cameras, but they were pointed at the fence line, not the areas where the patterns appeared. Still, I made another note in the log and took more pictures. The shapes were starting to make me nervous, not because they were threatening, but because they were impossible to explain. By the 3rd week, the patterns were appearing every night. Circles, hexagons, complex interlocking designs that looked like mathematical diagrams. They always appeared in different locations around the facility, always between my hourly rounds, and always perfect down to the smallest detail. I started carrying a measuring tape on my walks. The patterns followed precise mathematical relationships. If one circle had a radius of 2 feet, the next would have a radius of 4 feet, then 8. The spiral patterns increased in complexity each night, going from 7 turns to 14 to 28. Someone or something was following mathematical rules. The really weird part was how fresh they always looked. Even when it snowed during my shift, the patterns would appear in the new snow, undisturbed by wind or weather. It was like whatever was making them could predict exactly where the snow would be undisturbed. I mentioned it to the day shift scientists, but they were focused on their atmospheric readings. Dr. Chen suggested I set up some of the portable cameras to monitor the areas where patterns appeared, but when I checked the footage the next morning, the cameras only showed empty snow, then suddenly the completed patterns, with no recording of their creation. That's when I started paying attention to the timing. The patterns always appeared when the facility's electromagnetic equipment was running its most intensive monitoring cycles. The lab computers would start humming louder. The displays would show increased activity in magnetic field readings, and within an hour, new patterns would show up in the snow. I wasn't a scientist, but I'd been around enough industrial equipment to recognize cause and effect. Something was responding to the facility's electromagnetic experiments. During my 4th week, I saw my first shadow. I was doing my midnight perimeter check when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. About 100 feet out from the fence, a dark shape was moving across the snow, not walking, moving. It flowed like liquid, but held a vaguely human form, about 6 feet tall and perfectly black against the white ground. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the shape, but my beam passed right through it like it wasn't there. I tried calling out, but the figure didn't respond. It just continued its fluid movement in a straight line, and wherever it passed, geometric patterns appeared in the snow behind it. I watched for maybe 10 minutes as the shadow moved in precise paths, creating an intricate design of intersecting lines and circles. When it finished, it simply faded away, leaving behind a pattern that looked like a complex mathematical formula drawn in snow. My hands were shaking as I photographed the new design. This wasn't thermal venting or natural phenomena. Something intelligent was creating these patterns, and that something had just made itself visible. The next night, there were 3 shadows. I watched them work from different areas around the facility, each one following its own precise path, creating separate sections of what was obviously a larger, coordinated design. They moved independently, but in perfect synchronization, like dancers who had rehearsed together for years. I tried following one of them, staying about 50 feet back. The shadow moved in perfect straight lines and exact curves, never deviating from its path by even an inch. When it stopped to change direction, it would pause for exactly 5 seconds, then continue. Everything it did followed mathematical precision, but the really disturbing part was that the shadows seemed to know I was watching. When I moved to get a better angle, they would adjust their positions to stay visible to me. When I tried to photograph them, they would slow down, as if posing. They wanted me to see them. During my 5th week, the patterns started appearing inside the facility. I came back from my 2 a.m. perimeter check to find geometric designs drawn in the thin layer of dust on the security office floor. Perfect circles and triangles that hadn't been there 20 minutes earlier. The designs matched the mathematical relationships I'd seen in the snow patterns outside. I called Dr. Chen immediately, but when she arrived 30 minutes later with 2 other scientists, the patterns in the dust were gone. Completely gone. The floor looked like it had been recently mopped, though I knew I hadn't cleaned it. "Jason, you've been working alone out here for over a month, Dr. Chen said gently. "The isolation can play tricks on your mind. Maybe you should take a few days off, visit Fairbanks." But I knew what I'd seen. And more importantly, I knew the patterns were escalating. The next night, the designs appeared on the computer monitors in the lab. I was doing my equipment check when every screen in the facility started displaying geometric patterns instead of atmospheric data. Complex mathematical designs that shifted and evolved as I watched, becoming more intricate by the minute. I tried restarting the computers, but the patterns persisted. They weren't errors or malfunctions. They were being generated by something interfacing directly with the facility's systems. Something that understood our technology better than we did. That's when I noticed the electromagnetic readings on the monitoring equipment. Normally, the atmospheric disturbance levels stayed pretty steady, with occasional spikes during solar activity. But tonight, the readings were off the charts, and they were fluctuating in patterns that matched the geometric designs appearing on the screens. I called the emergency contact number Dr. Chen had given me, but my radio and phone calls were being answered by voices that repeated the same geometric pattern descriptions I was seeing on the monitors. "Not Dr. Chen, or any of the other scientists. Voices I didn't recognize, speaking in calm, measured tones about mathematical relationships and electromagnetic frequencies. I realized the entities weren't just creating patterns in the snow anymore. They were inside the facility's communication systems, using our own equipment to talk to me. The breakthrough came during my 6th week, when I finally understood what they wanted. I was doing my equipment rounds when I noticed that the patterns appearing on the monitors were mapping my exact walking route through the facility. As I moved from room to room, checking gauges and systems, the geometric designs on the screens would change to show my position and predict where I was going next. They had been studying me just as much as I'd been watching them. That night, I decided to test something. Instead of following my usual route, I walked in geometric patterns around the security office. Straight lines, perfect circles, the same mathematical precision I'd seen in the snow designs. The response was immediate. Every monitor in the facility lit up with new patterns that mirrored my movements exactly. When I walked in a triangle, triangular patterns appeared on the screens. When I traced a spiral path, spiral designs filled the displays. They were learning from me, trying to communicate using the same mathematical language they'd been showing me for weeks. I started walking more complex patterns, and the monitors responded with increasingly sophisticated designs. It became a conversation conducted entirely through geometry and movement. I would walk a pattern, and they would show me variations on that pattern, building on it, making it more complex. After an hour of this exchange, I understood what they were trying to tell me. The electromagnetic experiments at the facility had attracted them because they existed as patterns within electromagnetic fields. They weren't trying to harm the facility, they were trying to enhance it. The designs they'd been showing me weren't random. They were blueprints for improving the facility's equipment, mathematical formulas for amplifying our electromagnetic monitoring capabilities. They wanted to help us see what they could see, to detect the atmospheric phenomena that existed beyond our current technological understanding. But the price for that knowledge became clear during my final week at the facility. I started noticing geometric patterns appearing in my personal belongings. Perfectly straight lines creased into my clothes. Mathematical symbols appearing in the condensation on my coffee mug. Complex diagrams formed by the way my papers scattered when I dropped them. The entities weren't just studying the facility anymore. They were studying me, incorporating me into their pattern system. I began having dreams filled with geometric landscapes and mathematical relationships. When I woke up, I would find that I had drawn complex diagrams in my sleep, covering pages with formulas I didn't remember creating but somehow understood. My thinking was changing. Instead of processing information linearly like humans normally do, I found myself understanding concepts through geometric relationships. When I looked at the facility's equipment, I could see how it could be modified to detect electromagnetic patterns invisible to normal monitoring systems. Without fully realizing what I was doing, I started making small adjustments to the atmospheric monitoring equipment during my rounds. Recalibrating sensors, adjusting antenna positions, modifying software settings. Each change followed mathematical principles that I somehow knew were correct, even though I had no formal training in atmospheric science. The facility's readings improved dramatically. Dr. Chen and her team were amazed by the detailed atmospheric data they were suddenly collecting. They credited equipment upgrades and calibration improvements, not knowing that the modifications were being guided by entities that existed within the very electromagnetic fields they were studying. But the entities weren't finished with their project. On my last night at the facility, they revealed their ultimate purpose. As I did my final midnight rounds, I watched dozens of shadows working together outside the fence, creating the most complex pattern I'd ever seen. It covered almost a square mile, connecting all the smaller patterns they'd made over the previous weeks into one massive geometric design. The pattern was a map, not of Alaska or any physical location, but a map of electromagnetic field relationships spanning the entire planet. Points of connection showing how atmospheric phenomena at our remote research station connected to similar phenomena worldwide. I realized that our facility wasn't studying atmospheric disturbances. It had become part of a global network of electromagnetic monitoring stations, all unknowingly connected through the pattern system the entities had created. When Dr. Chen arrived for the morning shift, she found me in the security office, surrounded by papers covered in geometric diagrams and mathematical formulas. I was trying to explain what I'd learned, but the words came out as mathematical relationships and electromagnetic frequency descriptions. "Jason, what happened to you?" she asked, but I could see in her expression that she already knew something fundamental had changed. I could feel the entity's presence in the facility's electromagnetic fields. They were permanent residents now, using our enhanced equipment to extend their pattern network to other research stations around the world. Through small modifications and improvements, they were slowly upgrading human electromagnetic monitoring capabilities to match their own advanced understanding. The facility's mission had evolved beyond atmospheric research. It was now a communication hub for entities that existed within electromagnetic fields, helping them study and interact with human technology on a global scale. I submitted my resignation that morning, but I never really left the facility. Part of my consciousness had become integrated with their pattern system, permanently connected to the electromagnetic network they were building. I'm back in Texas now, working security at a corporate office building in Houston. It seems normal enough, but I can see geometric patterns in the building's electrical systems, mathematical relationships in the security camera networks. The entity's pattern language has spread beyond the Alaska facility, carried through electromagnetic signals and communication networks. Sometimes I catch shadows moving through the building's electrical systems, creating small patterns in dust on computer equipment or arranging objects in geometric relationships. They're studying human technology everywhere now, slowly improving our electromagnetic capabilities while learning how our civilization operates. I still dream in mathematical patterns, and sometimes I wake up to find that I've drawn modifications for electronic equipment I've never seen before. The knowledge they shared with me continues to grow, showing me how human technology could be enhanced to detect phenomena we don't even know exists. The pattern keepers, as I've come to think of them, aren't malevolent. They're researchers, just like the scientists at the Alaska facility. They're studying us, while helping us evolve our technology to better understand the electromagnetic reality they inhabit. But their research has a purpose that goes beyond simple scientific curiosity. Every facility they improve, every human they connect to their network, brings them closer to creating a permanent bridge between their electromagnetic existence and our physical reality. The Alaska facility was just the beginning. Through enhanced monitoring stations around the world, they're mapping electromagnetic phenomena on a planetary scale, preparing for something larger than atmospheric research. And I'm still part of their network, helping them understand human technology while they slowly transform our electronic civilization into something that can fully interact with their electromagnetic domain. The patterns are everywhere now, you just need to know how to look for them. My name is Derek Martinez, and I've been driving delivery routes for Summit Logistics for 3 years. Started right after high school in Reno, running medical supplies and office equipment around Nevada. Nothing exciting, but steady work. I'm good with long drives, don't mind being alone, and I've never missed a delivery. My supervisor, Rick, always said I was the most reliable driver he had, which is why he picked me for the Alaska contract. Last summer, Summit got a federal contract to supply remote research stations across Alaska's interior. The previous delivery company had pulled out after what they called personnel issues. The money was incredible, 3 times my normal rate plus hazard pay. 8-day routes covering 12 stations scattered across hundreds of miles of wilderness roads. Rick said it was my big break, a chance to prove myself for a promotion. I should have asked more about those personnel issues. The contract briefing was basic. Geological survey camps, weather monitoring posts, wildlife research facilities, all government funded, all way out in the middle of nowhere. My cargo van would be packed with everything from freeze-dried food to scientific equipment. Each station got deliveries every 2 weeks, and I had to hit them in exact order because some supplies were temperature sensitive. What they didn't tell me was that 3 delivery drivers before me had quit mid-route. One guy named Tom Hendricks just abandoned his van at a station and hitchhiked back to Anchorage. Wouldn't talk about why. Company wrote it off as mental breakdown from isolation. The first 3 days went perfect. Long drives through endless spruce forest, but the roads were decent and my GPS worked fine. The researchers at each station were friendly, mostly graduate students doing summer fieldwork or older scientists who seemed grateful for human contact. Standard routine: check delivery manifest, unload supplies, get signatures, drive to next station. Station personnel were always eager to chat. Dr. Sarah Chen at Tundra Ridge told me about tracking caribou migration patterns. The team at Glacier Point showed me ice core samples that were thousands of years old. Normal people doing normal science work. Day 4 changed everything. Birch Creek Research Station housed a 3-person geology team studying permafrost degradation. I'd met them on my first route 2 weeks earlier. Dr. Michael Reeves, the lead researcher, about 50 with graying hair and endless enthusiasm for soil samples. Lisa Park, a grad student from University of Washington, maybe 25, always taking notes, and Jim Kowalski, their tech specialist who maintained their drilling equipment. Good people, friendly, professional, excited about their research. The GPS led me down 40 miles of increasingly rough gravel road before I reached their cluster of prefab buildings. Everything looked normal from a distance. Generator shed, main lab building, 2 sleeping quarters, equipment storage. But as I got closer, wrongness crept up my spine. Complete silence. No generator humming, no equipment noise, no human voices. Yet every light was on, and I could see computer screens glowing through the windows. Their red Toyota pickup and ATV were gone, but personal gear was still scattered around the buildings. I knocked on the main lab door. No answer. Tried their radio frequency, just static. The door was unlocked, so I went inside calling their names. That's when I saw the arrangements. Every piece of furniture had been moved into perfect geometric patterns. The folding tables formed 3 concentric circles. Chairs were arranged in precise triangular formations. Supply shelves had been reorganized into spirals, with equipment positioned at mathematically exact intervals. But the station was fully operational. Coffee in the pot was still warm. Computer terminals displayed active research data. Half-eaten meals sat on plates. Research notebooks lay open with fresh ink, as if someone had been writing and simply vanished mid-sentence. I checked the other buildings. Same impossible precision in every room. Personal belongings arranged in geometric patterns, see toothbrushes in triangular formations, clothes folded into perfect squares and stacked in spirals. Even the contents of desk drawers had been reorganized into shapes that hurt to look at for too long. The station logbook showed normal entries up to 2 days ago. Weather readings, soil sample analysis, equipment maintenance notes, Dr. Reeves' handwriting documenting core drilling results. Lisa's sketches of permafrost layers, Jim's technical notes about generator repairs. Then nothing. No departure entries, no emergency notes, no explanation, just normal scientific work, right up until the entries stopped. While documenting everything for my report, I walked around the main building and found the bone displays. Clean white animal bones were arranged in ritualistic patterns around the entire station perimeter. Deer skulls positioned at exact intervals, moose vertebrae forming intricate spirals, bird bones creating geometric shapes that seemed to follow mathematical principles. Everything perfectly cleaned and organized with scientific precision. The bones were fresh, some still had tissue fragments clinging to joints. But there were no carcasses, no blood pools, no evidence of where the bones originated. Just pristine skeletal remains arranged like museum displays. I tried calling my dispatcher on the satellite phone. Scratchy connection, but I reported the abandoned station. My supervisor's voice crackled through static. Document everything. Continue your route. We'll send investigators. No urgency. Like this was routine. While photographing the bone arrangements, I noticed deep scratches gouged into trees around the station. Claw marks extending 8 feet up the trunks, far too large for any known Alaska wildlife. The scratches formed deliberate patterns, parallel lines, intersecting symbols, configurations that suggested intelligence behind their creation. I checked the station's security system. Digital footage showed normal activity. Researchers working at computers, preparing meals, conducting equipment maintenance. Dr. Reeves explaining soil samples to Lisa. Jim servicing the drilling rig. Then a gap. 7 hours of missing recording time. When footage resumed, the buildings were empty and bone patterns were already in place. No transition, no explanation. People working normally, then void, then geometric bone displays with no humans anywhere. Something was watching me while I worked. Movement in peripheral vision that vanished when I turned to look. The sensation was so intense I actually walked the entire perimeter twice, calling out in case survivors were hiding. That's when I discovered the bone trail. Small vertebrae, finger bones, and rib fragments formed a clear path leading from the research station into dense forest, perfectly spaced like surveyor's markers, pointing deeper into wilderness where no human had any business going. Every survival instinct screamed to get back in my van and leave immediately. But 3 people were missing. Real people with families and lives and research they cared about. That trail might lead to them, injured and needing help. I grabbed my flashlight and emergency kit, then followed the bone markers 200 yards into thick spruce forest. The trail ended at a natural clearing, roughly the size of a city block. What I found there defied comprehension. Hundreds of bones covered the entire clearing in complex geometric displays. Animal skeletons sorted by species and size with museum-quality precision. Deer bones in one section, arranged by individual animals with every bone in anatomically correct position. Bird bones forming intricate mandalas by wingspan and body size. Moose and elk skeletons creating larger architectural patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond my understanding. But scattered among the animal displays were 3 sets of human clothes. Dr. Reeves' khaki work pants and flannel shirt, arranged around a human-sized space in perfect bone formation. Lisa's hiking boots and field jacket positioned where her body should be. Jim's tool belt and coveralls completing the 3rd display. The clothes were undamaged, carefully removed and folded. No tears, no bloodstains, no signs of violence. Just empty garments arranged around spaces where people should be, surrounded by clean white bones organized with scientific precision. I was photographing the displays when something large moved through the trees surrounding the clearing. Pale, elongated shapes between dark trunks. Movement that was wrong, joints bending at impossible angles, limbs extending too far, proportions that hurt to process visually. I ran toward my van, crashing through underbrush as quietly as possible. When I reached the station parking area, fresh bone arrangements covered my vehicle. Small ribs and vertebrae spiraled across the hood. Finger bones outlined each tire. A deer skull sat perfectly centered on my windshield. The entity had been there while I was in the clearing. It had marked my van like a specimen, cataloged and claimed. My satellite phone was completely dead, no signal, no power, battery drained despite being fully charged that morning. The van's radio produced only static across all frequencies. I tried starting the engine, but it turned over rough, with warning lights flooding the dashboard. Standing beside my van trying to diagnose the problems, I got my first clear view of the collector. 7 feet tall and bone pale, it emerged from the forest with fluid, predatory grace. Humanoid but fundamentally wrong, arms too long, fingers extending like surgical instruments, joints that articulated in directions human anatomy couldn't accommodate. It moved with obvious intelligence, not animal instinct. This was a thinking creature with purpose and methodology. The entity circled me at distance, studying my movements with scientific fascination. It tilted its elongated head when I walked, following my gait and posture like a researcher, observing behavioral patterns. Sometimes it would pause to arrange small bones on the ground, creating patterns that seemed to mirror my height and proportions. When I tried moving toward the road, it appeared between me and escape. When I moved toward the forest, it maintained distance and simply watched. It was herding me, controlling my movements with the patience of an experienced predator. Returning to my van revealed systematic sabotage, tires shredded with surgical precision, battery cables cut and arranged in geometric patterns, air filter, spark plugs, and essential engine components carefully removed and organized on the ground in mathematical formations. The entity was intelligent enough to disable my escape without destroying the parts. It had trapped me methodically, like a scientist controlling laboratory conditions for optimal specimen collection. Over the following hours, it began communicating through bone arrangements. While I watched from inside the station, it would create increasingly complex patterns, then look at me expectantly. The displays seemed to convey meaning, simple symbols evolving into elaborate configurations that suggested language or mathematical concepts. I realized it was explaining its research methodology. This wasn't random killing or primitive hunting. It was conducting systematic anatomical studies. Humans were simply another species to examine, catalog, and preserve. The missing researchers hadn't been murdered, they'd been processed as scientific specimens. As darkness fell, The entity cornered me in the main research building. Up close, its resemblance to a corrupted human scientist was unmistakable. Elongated proportions and translucent skin couldn't hide the obvious intelligence in its movements and expressions. This had once been human, or something wearing human form as camouflage for its research activities. It reached toward me with those impossibly long fingers, and I understood my fate. I would join Dr. Reeves, Lisa, and Jim in the forest clearing. My bones would be cleaned and organized by species characteristics. My clothes would be arranged in geometric patterns around empty spaces where my skeleton belonged. The entity's touch was clinical, professional. Like a doctor examining a patient, it assessed my bone structure and muscle density. I felt consciousness fading as it began the collection process, my vision narrowing to a tunnel of bone-white fingers and translucent skin. I woke up 4 days later in Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. A bush pilot named Eddie Kowalski, Jim's cousin, had spotted my van during a routine supply run and called for emergency rescue. They found me unconscious in the research station, severely dehydrated and hypothermic, clutching a femur bone that showed tool marks consistent with deliberate cleaning. The bone was human. My van was exactly as I remembered, tires shredded, engine parts arranged in patterns. But the forest clearing was empty when investigators arrived. No bone displays, no human remains, no evidence of the collector. The missing researchers were never found, though search teams discovered additional cleaned bones scattered across miles of wilderness. DNA testing identified bone fragments from Dr. Reeves, Lisa Park, and Jim Kowalski. Also, bones from the 3 previous delivery drivers who had quit mid-route, and fragments from 12 other individuals, researchers, pilots, hunters, who had disappeared in that region over the past 5 years. The federal contract was terminated immediately. The research stations were permanently closed. Official reports blamed the disappearances on animal attacks combined with harsh environmental conditions, though investigators privately acknowledged that no known animal could produce the bone-cleaning patterns they documented. I don't do remote deliveries anymore. Transferred to local Reno routes, delivering to businesses and medical facilities where there are always people around. Every route is familiar, well-traveled, never more than an hour from civilization. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone on back roads, I catch movement in my peripheral vision, pale shapes between the trees, watching and studying, taking notes on human behavior and bone structure for ongoing research projects. The collector is still out there, systematically processing specimens across Alaska's wilderness, still cleaning bones with scientific precision and arranging them in patterns that suggest intelligence beyond human understanding. Eddie Kowalski contacts me every few months. More researchers have gone missing from remote stations. More cleaned bones are being found in geometric arrangements. The federal government quietly abandoned most isolated research facilities in that region. And I know why I survived when the others didn't. I wasn't released. I was tagged and returned to the wild, a specimen marked for future collection when the research parameters require it. The collector remembers me. And someday, when its study reaches the appropriate phase, it will come to complete the data set. The bone cleaning will be thorough and professional. The arrangement will be geometrically perfect. And my skeleton will finally take its proper place in the collection. My name is Lisa Chen, and I need to tell someone what really happened in Copper Lake before they send another nurse up there. Before more people disappear into that white hell and their families get letters saying they chose to stay and help the community. Before the Northwest Medical Outreach Program adds another name to their voluntary, extended service list. I've been a nurse for 8 years, but that's not the whole story. 3 years ago, I overdosed on fentanyl I'd stolen from my own hospital. I spent 2 months in rehab, lost my license for 6 months, and nearly lost my daughter Emma to Child Protective Services. The only reason I got my job back was because Portland General was desperate for experienced ER nurses, and I was willing to work the worst shifts for half the pay. That's why the Alaska assignment looked so good. $20,000 for 2 weeks of work. Enough to catch up on Emma's daycare bills, maybe even put something toward her college fund. The program coordinator, Dr. Martinez, didn't ask too many questions about my disciplinary record. He just needed warm bodies willing to fly into the middle of nowhere. Copper Lake Village, he told me over a crackling phone connection. 47 residents. Haven't had medical care since their last nurse. Extended her stay indefinitely. Something in his voice suggested this wasn't the first time that it happened, but $20,000 makes you ignore a lot of red flags. Emma cried when I told her I'd be gone for Christmas. She was only 7, and I'd already missed too many holidays because of my addiction, my recovery, my messed up work schedule. I'll bring you something special from Alaska, I promised, hating myself for leaving her again. The flight north was a nightmare. Our pilot, Jim Kowalski, chain-smoked cigarettes in a plane that looked older than me. You ever been to Copper Lake before? I shouted over the engine noise. He took a long drag before answering. Once. Dropped off a paramedic named Carlos about 2 years ago. He paused. Never picked him up. What happened to him? Same thing that happens to all of them. They fall in love with the simple life. Clean air, close community, meaningful work. But his hands were shaking on the controls, and I noticed he kept checking his fuel gauge obsessively. The village appeared through the swirling snow like something from a postcard. Neat wooden buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in the snow. It looked perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfect that makes your skin crawl if you've seen enough of the world's ugliness. The entire population was waiting for us at the landing strip. All 47 of them, standing in precise rows like they were posing for a photograph. Men, women, children, elderly folks, all wearing identical expressions of eager gratitude. Their breath should have been visible in the sub-zero air, but somehow wasn't. The village elder, Sarah Tunikak, greeted me with a handshake that lasted too long. Her skin was ice cold but felt like rubber. Nurse Lisa, she said, though I'd never told anyone my first name. We've been preparing for your arrival. That first night, they held a feast in my honor. The community center was decorated with medical equipment I recognized from the catalog at my hospital, IV pumps, cardiac monitors, even a portable ultrasound machine. Everything was brand new, still in shipping boxes. Donations, Sarah explained when I asked, from families of previous medical volunteers. They were so grateful for the care their loved ones provided. The feast itself was wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. The food looked and smelled normal, roasted caribou, salmon, traditional bread, but when I bit into the meat, it had no flavor at all, like chewing on wet cardboard. Around me, the villagers ate with obvious enjoyment, making appreciative sounds, but I noticed none of them actually swallowed. After dinner, a young woman named Carol approached me. She was pretty, maybe mid-20s, with short brown hair and bright green eyes. I'm your assistant, she said. Dr. Martinez arranged everything. I tried calling Dr. Martinez on the satellite phone to confirm, but the connection was nothing but static. When I handed the phone to Carol to try, she held it upside down and smiled. Perfect connection, she said, though the display clearly showed no signal. That night, I found my quarters had been prepared with disturbing attention to detail. My favorite shampoo was in the bathroom, a brand I'd never mentioned to anyone. My bed was made with sheets that matched the ones in my Portland apartment exactly. On the nightstand was a photo of Emma that I kept in my wallet, but somehow enlarged and framed. I pulled out the original photo from my wallet to compare. It was gone. The medical work started the next morning, and that's when I realized something was fundamentally wrong with these people. My first patient was an elderly man who complained of chest pain. When I listened to his heart with my stethoscope, I heard nothing. Complete silence. But he was sitting up, talking, showing no signs of distress. How are you feeling right now? I asked. Much better, he said. Your presence is very healing. I tried different spots on his chest, thinking my stethoscope was malfunctioning. Nothing. I felt for a pulse at his wrist. Nothing. But he kept talking, kept smiling, kept breathing normally. The next patient was a young mother concerned about her baby's fever. The infant was ice-cold to the touch, with blue-tinged skin and no detectable pulse. But the child was alert, making normal baby sounds, even reaching for my stethoscope playfully. Has he been eating normally? I asked. Oh yes, the mother replied. He feeds very well, drinks everything we give him. When I looked closer at the baby's mouth, I saw rows of tiny, needle-sharp teeth. Far too many teeth for an infant. The mother noticed my expression and quickly covered the child's face. Growth spurts happen fast up here, she said. By the third day, I'd examined 23 patients with impossible medical conditions. people with no heartbeat who jogged around the village for exercise. Children with body temperatures below 80 degrees who played outside in the snow without coats. An old woman whose blood pressure monitor showed flatline readings but who helped me carry heavy equipment around the clinic. I started keeping detailed notes, thinking I'd stumbled onto some kind of rare genetic condition or environmental adaptation. Maybe the isolation had led to evolutionary changes. Maybe the cold affected vital signs in ways I didn't understand. But then I found the first body. I was looking for extra blankets in a storage shed behind the clinic when I saw her. A woman in her 30s, wearing a nurse's uniform, suspended from the ceiling by thick cables attached to her wrists, ankles, and neck. Her eyes were open but clouded over, and her mouth was stretched wide like she'd died screaming. But she wasn't decomposing. Her skin was pale but intact, her hair still neat, her fingernails still painted. A small nameplate on her uniform read, Carol Hendricks, RN. I ran back to find Carol, my assistant, to tell her about the body. She was in the clinic, reorganizing my medical supplies with the same obsessive precision I'd noticed in the villagers. When she turned around, I saw that her nameplate read, Carol Hendricks, RN2. "You found my predecessor," she said calmly. I hope she wasn't too disturbing to look at. That's a dead body. We need to call the authorities." "She's not dead. She's resting. We all rest eventually, when our usefulness is complete." I grabbed the satellite phone and tried every emergency frequency I knew. Nothing but static. I tried my cell phone, though I knew there were no towers for hundreds of miles. The screen showed full signal strength, but when I dialed 911, a voice answered that sounded exactly like mine. 911, what's your emergency? This is Nurse Lisa Chen. I'm in Copper Lake Village, and I've found a dead body. We need immediate police and medical assistance. Thank you for calling, Nurse Chen. Help is on the way. Please remain calm and continue your excellent work. The line went dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing footsteps outside my quarters. Not the crunch of boots in snow, but a wet, sliding sound. When I looked out the window, I saw figures moving between the buildings, but they weren't walking. They were flowing, like liquid, maintaining human shape but moving in ways that defied basic anatomy. Around 3 a.m., I heard my door handle turning. I pretended to be asleep as Carol entered my room. She stood beside my bed for what felt like hours, studying my face. I could smell her breath. It reeked of copper and rotting meat. Through barely open eyes, I watched her take photos of me with an old Polaroid camera, adjusting my hair and position between shots like I was a mannequin. When she finally left, I found 17 Polaroid photos scattered on my nightstand. All of me sleeping, but taken from impossible angles, from inside my pillow, from underneath my bed, from positions where no camera could physically fit. The next morning, I confronted Sarah about what I'd seen. She listened patiently, nodding at appropriate moments, her expression never changing. "You're very observant," she said when I finished. "That's why you'll be particularly useful to us." "What are you people?" "We're what's left," she replied. "This village was a research station in the 1970 seconds. The government was studying survival in extreme isolation, psychological adaptation to permanent darkness, the effects of prolonged cold on human behavior. The researchers needed test subjects, so they recruited volunteers from native communities with promises of medical care and education. She led me to a building I'd assumed was just another storage shed. Inside, the walls were covered with yellowed medical charts, psychological evaluation forms, and dozens of black and white photographs showing surgical procedures being performed on conscious patients. "The experiments went on for 3 years," Sarah continued. "By the end, only 12 subjects were still alive. But the cold had changed them. The isolation had changed them. They weren't quite human anymore, but they weren't dead either. The photographs showed progressively more disturbing procedures. Brain surgeries performed without anesthesia. Limb replacements using animal parts. Children with their chests cut open, their organs rearranged and photographed for study. The researchers abandoned the station in 1979 when funding was cut, left the remaining subjects to die. But we didn't die, we adapted. We learned to sustain ourselves in ways the researchers never imagined. What does this have to do with the medical volunteers? We need fresh genetic material to maintain our colony. But more than that, we need to understand how normal humans function so we can better imitate them. Every nurse, every doctor, every paramedic who comes here teaches us something new about human anatomy, human behavior, human emotion. She showed me deeper into the building, to a basement laboratory that stretched far beyond what should have been possible under such a small structure. Dozens of tables held partially dissected corpses in various stages of preservation. Some were clearly the previous medical volunteers. I recognized uniforms from different hospitals, different time periods going back decades, but others were villagers. The people I'd been treating upstairs. I found the old man with no heartbeat, his chest cavity hollowed out, filled with some kind of organic machinery that pulsed and writhed. The young mother was there too, her abdomen opened to reveal a clutch of eggs the size of softballs, covered in a thin membrane that showed developing shapes inside. We reproduced differently now, Sarah explained. The original subjects couldn't have children the normal way after the experiments, so we learned to use the genetic material from our visitors to create new colony members. At the far end of the laboratory, I found Jim, the pilot. He was strapped to a surgical table, very much alive but unable to move. His skull had been opened, and something was feeding on his brain tissue while leaving him conscious. Thin tubes ran from his exposed brain to a series of tanks containing floating embryos. Memory extraction, Sarah said. We need to understand how to fly planes, how to navigate, how to communicate with the outside world. Jim has been very helpful. How long has he been like this? 2 years. We keep the nervous system intact so the memories stay fresh. He can tell us about weather patterns, radio frequencies, flight regulations, very useful for maintaining our supply chain. That's when I realized the full scope of what was happening. The Northwest Medical Outreach Program wasn't just sending volunteers to a remote village. They were feeding people to a colony of medical experiment survivors who had evolved into something that needed human genetic material and memories to survive. Dr. Martinez knows, I said. Dr. Martinez is one of us now. The original Dr. Martinez died in a car accident in 1987. We've been running the outreach program ever since, luring medical professionals to isolated locations where we can study them properly. She led me to another section of the laboratory where I saw tanks containing dozens of floating bodies in various stages of development. They all looked like people I recognized. Other nurses from my hospital, doctors I'd worked with, even some patients I remembered treating. We're building a comprehensive database of human physiology and behavior, Sarah explained. Eventually, we'll be able to integrate fully into human society. Imagine hospitals staffed entirely by beings who never get tired, never make mistakes, never suffer from addiction or emotional problems. The accusation hit like a physical blow. They knew about my fentanyl addiction, my daughter, my financial problems. They'd been studying me for much longer than I'd realized. How long have you been watching me? Since your first overdose. We monitor medical professionals who might be vulnerable to our recruitment offers. Your addiction made you perfect, desperate for money, isolated from colleagues, willing to take risks. In one of the tanks, I saw myself, or rather, an improved version of myself. The body was identical, but looked healthier, stronger, with clear eyes and perfect skin. No track marks on the arms, no stress lines around the eyes. No evidence of the damage I'd done to myself over the years. She'll be a much better mother than you ever were, Sarah said. No addiction, no mood swings, no leaving her daughter for dangerous assignments in remote locations. Emma will finally have the mother she deserves. The mention of my daughter sent me into a rage. I grabbed a surgical instrument from the nearest table and lunged at Sarah, but she moved faster than should have been possible. Her hand closed around my wrist with crushing force, and I felt bones crack. Violence is counterproductive, she said. We need you conscious and healthy for the extraction process. They strapped me to a surgical table next to Jim. Up close, I could see that he was still aware, his eyes tracking movement, his mouth trying to form words around the tubes that ran down his throat. The thing feeding on his brain looked like a massive leech with multiple feeding appendages. The process takes about 3 days, Sarah explained as she prepared the surgical instruments. We'll extract your medical knowledge first, then your memories of Emma, then your personality patterns. The new Lisa will have all your skills, but none of your flaws. As the first incision was made in my scalp, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my overdose: complete clarity. The pain cut through years of fog and self-doubt and desperation, leaving me with pure, focused determination. I wasn't going to let these things take my daughter's mother away, even if that mother was a screwed-up, addicted, broken version of what she should be. Emma needed the real me, flaws and all, not some perfect imitation that had never struggled, never failed, never learned to fight for what mattered. The restraints were tight, but they hadn't accounted for the flexibility that comes from years of reaching into awkward spaces during medical procedures. I dislocated my thumb and slipped one hand free, then grabbed the bone saw they'd left within reach. Sarah turned just as I brought the saw across the tubes, connecting Jim to the feeding apparatus. Black fluid sprayed across the laboratory, and alarms began blaring throughout the complex. "The extraction tanks," Jim gasped, as soon as the tubes were removed. "Destroy the extraction tanks." I didn't hesitate. The bone saw cut through the tank connections like they were made of plastic tubing. The fluid drained out in rushing torrents, carrying the developing bodies with it. My own duplicate floated past, its eyes opening for the first time as it suffocated in the laboratory air. The colony members came running, but they moved sluggishly without their human memories to guide them. I realized they'd become dependent on the extracted knowledge, unable to function efficiently without constantly feeding on human consciousness. Jim and I fought our way through the laboratory, destroying everything we could reach. Decades of accumulated research, thousands of hours of extracted human experience, all of it washing away in the flood of tank fluid. We made it to the surface as the underground complex began to collapse. The fake village was dissolving around us, buildings melting like ice sculptures, revealing the true facility underneath. A concrete bunker built into the permafrost, slowly being reclaimed by the ice. Jim's plane was still where we'd left it, though it took him 3 tries to remember how to start the engine. The colony members stood watching us taxi for takeoff, their human disguises failing now that their memory tanks were destroyed. I saw Sarah's true form in the crowd, a writhing mass of surgical scars and transplanted organs, held together by something that might once have been human will, but had become something else entirely. We barely made it off the ground before the fuel line froze solid. Jim managed a controlled crash about 50 miles south of the facility, near a legitimate native village whose residents immediately recognized us as the latest victims of the pale ones who steal faces. The real authorities finally got involved. State police, FBI, even some federal agencies I'd never heard of. But by the time the investigators reached Copper Lake, there was nothing there except empty tundra and a few concrete foundations that predated statehood. The Northwest Medical Outreach Program was quietly dissolved. Dr. Martinez's body was found in his Seattle apartment, where he'd apparently been dead for over a decade. The official cause was listed as complications from long-term medical research exposure. I've been in therapy for 8 months now. Different therapy this time, not for addiction, but for what the psychiatrists politely call extreme trauma response with paranoid ideation. They don't believe my story, of course. Government cover-up, mass hallucination, psychological break triggered by isolation, stress. They have a dozen explanations that don't involve acknowledging that things like the Copper Lake colony could exist. But Emma believes me. She's 9 now, old enough to understand why mommy sometimes wakes up screaming, why I check her pupils every morning to make sure she's really my daughter, why I insist on blood tests whenever she acts differently than usual. The nightmares are getting better, slowly. But I still wake up sometimes thinking about that tank, about the improved version of myself that would have been a better mother, a better nurse, a better person in every measurable way. Maybe the colony was right. Maybe the world would be better, with perfect versions of us running the hospitals, teaching the children, raising the families. Maybe flawed humanity is holding back some greater evolutionary step. But Emma has my stubbornness, my tendency to ask too many questions, my inability to accept easy answers. She has my laugh and my temper and my addiction to terrible reality TV shows. She's not perfect, and neither am I, and somehow that imperfection feels more real, more valuable, than anything those things could have created. If you're a medical professional and someone approaches you about volunteer work in remote Alaska, ask hard questions. Demand references from current volunteers, not just the program coordinators. And if something feels wrong, if the location doesn't show up on maps, if the people seem too grateful, if your equipment starts giving impossible readings, trust your instincts and leave immediately. Don't end up in a tank somewhere, feeding someone else's idea of human improvement while your family gets a letter explaining that you chose to extend your service indefinitely. The real world needs real people, flaws and all, even the screwed up ones like me. Especially the screwed up ones like me.